Hello, everyone, and welcome to the weekly live stream of the Platformers. And today we are going to talk about an open source project that I personally love, and I think that everyone involving in cloud native loves, and this is ArgoCD. And for that, we got a really special guest, Reggie Voloshin. She is she is the only release lead of ArgoCD 213. Um, Reggie, how are you today?
I'm great, thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
We too, like I think from the first day we have met, I told you that I want you to be in our weekly live stream. I'm so excited that today is the day. And also I also got the opportunity to watch part of the session, and I have to say it's really exciting because multi-tenancy is challenging with Argo City.
Great.
So I think without further ado, maybe we can start the session.
All right. So hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today. Welcome to my talk about securing ArgoCD in multi-tenant environments. I encourage you to ask questions during any time, write questions during any time.
Yeah,
And
it's a good reminder. Sorry, I forgot that. But if you got any question, post them on YouTube or in LinkedIn. We want to get your question. We are going to stop and answer your question. So we are going to do that. So just post whatever you like. Sorry for interrupting.
okay. So are any of you doing this in production using the default project? Please feel free to comment in the comments if you do so.
I guess some do.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are some people who do that. But anyway, please don't do that in production. And so, are you doing this? Are you having all your users log into ArgoCD UI with the default admin user? Please feel free to admit your crime in the comments. Please don't do that too. Later on, we will discuss two secure approaches, two secure alternatives to those two questions about insecure practice that I have just asked you about. My name is Reggie. I'm an open source software tech lead at Codefresh by Octopus Deploy. I'm also a CNCF ambassador and an ArgoCD maintainer, and I co-authored the CNCF certified Argo project associate exam. ArgoCD is a very popular open source project, and with 41 maintainers, and out of those 41 were only 4 female maintainers. So I hope that the ladies in this audience can maybe be the next contributors or the next ArgoCD maintainers. Couple of words about my company, Codefresh GitOps by Octopus Deploy. We offer Argo control plane and promotions, which makes you have the opportunity to very flexibly model your business products and then promote them from one environment to another, either by UI or by declarative Kubernetes way. We also offer Argo enterprise support and technical account management, a hardened security distro for Argo, and the #1 GitOps training and certification with over 23,000 of students. So back to our topic. Today we will be talking about ArgoCD adoption at day 1, at day 2. Day 1 is when you have just installed it, and day 2 when your usage of ArgoCD is starting to get at scale. So typically, when we start to use ArgoCD at day 1, we have one developer that is accessing ArgoCD with one application, and that one application is installing resources to one Kubernetes cluster with one namespace. And so this scenario is single tenant, both on the left side and on the right side. And then as the ArgoCD is starting to be used at scale at day 2, we have multiple teams, platform teams and developer teams that are accessing the same ArgoCD instance, and then the applications in that ArgoCD instance are accessing multiple clusters and are deploying resources into multiple namespaces. And so the single tenant environment from day one now becomes a multi-tenant environment, both on the left side and on the right side. And as your ArgoCD usage scales, then suddenly all those kinds of security requirements start to come into play. And one of those requirements would be to restrict the ArgoCD access to teams. And then we typically would have different teams, and then each team would be required to only have access to its applications without accessing the applications of other teams. And then you also typically have a platform team, which is less restricted, and it should have wider permissions, and then it can access all the applications and also the infrastructure applications. And so the next requirement that you have probably met or will meet in the near future if you're starting to use ArgoCD more and more is the requirement to restrict the actions that the different personas in the organizations can do with ArgoCD applications. And so in this example, you have the Team A developers, which can update and view their applications, and Team B can sync and view their applications. And then the platform team can perform any action on any application. Another popular requirement is restricting which Kubernetes resources are permitted to be deployed per ArgoCD application. And so we have business applications that typically can install resources by environment. So dev applications will install resources to dev namespaces. And then all the business applications can be restricted, like in this example, to not be allowed to install resource quota or network policy Kubernetes resources. And then we have infrastructure applications that are less restricted, and those would typically deploy resources to different namespaces from different teams, and those applications would also typically be able to deploy all those kinds of infrastructure resources, like in this example. Well, luckily, ArgoCD supports all those kinds of isolation, and it has a very flexible mechanism and security rules that can answer a wide range of needs and requirements. So when we're talking about ArgoCD, we're talking about two aspects. One aspect is controlling the access to ArgoCD resources, who can sync, who can update an application. And the other aspect is restricting the Kubernetes resources from Kubernetes point of view, which means restricting which Kubernetes kinds can an application deploy, from which Git or Helm repositories, and to which clusters and namespaces those will be deployed. Those two aspects are independent of each other, and they're linked together by the Argo App project entity. So what is this Argo App project? It logically groups applications. It controls the trusted Git or Helm repos. It also specifies the deployment cluster and namespaces, and it restricts the deployed kinds of Kubernetes resources. It also controls the user access to applications with ArgoCD RBAC. This is an example of how an application project would group the applications. You see that all the applications have a common field that's called project. And this is the grouping. So let's go into details about the left side, which is the ArgoCD resources, restriction of access. And in order to understand this part, we need to understand how the ArgoCD RBAC model works. So let's examine the policy building blocks. Let's examine the resources and the actions. For resources in ArgoCD, we have applications, application sets, projects, logs, and exec. It's important to understand that projects are also resources by themselves. Applications are sub-resources of projects. And when we talk about logs and exec, then those two are related to the pod details that you see in ArgoCD UI. About the actions, the available actions are get, create, update, delete, and sync. Actually, there are more resources and more actions in ArgoCD RBAC, but I will be showing you only the most commonly used ones. So for applications, get, create, update, delete, and sync, all those actions are relevant. But if we look at application sets and projects, then it's not relevant to sync them, so there is no such action for those. For logs, we're talking about the ability to see in the UI the logs of a container. So semantically, this is treated as a get action. But when we're talking about an exec, it's a little different. This is the ability to exec into a running container and to potentially perform some kind of action inside of it. And so this is treated as a create action from a semantic point of view. Regarding the update and the delete, those two actions can operate on two distinct levels. One level is the level of the application, meaning that application can be updated or deleted. And the other level is the level of the resources that this application manages. So one popular scenario would be allowing the deletion of pods that application manages. So let's continue with the building blocks. We have an invoker and an object. Invoker answers the question who. And the invoker can be either role, user, or a group. So let's see a couple of examples. This is an example of a read-only role under project team A. This is an example of user J, and this is an example of group platform admins. If we look at the object, then the object is either a project or an application. And let's observe some of the object examples. Wildcard means all or everything. So this is an example of all applications under Team A project. This is app1 under Team A project. This is the Team A project itself. And this means all the applications under all the projects. Another a bit more advanced example is relevant if you're using the applications in any namespace feature. In this case, when we specify the object, we will also specify the namespace that the application lives in. So the application, then the namespace, and under the project. Now that we have learned all the building blocks, we can take a look at the full policy structure and examine it. So the structure, what does it have? We have the who, which is the invoker. We have the resource, the action, the object, and the effect, which can be either allow or deny. From syntax point of view, we have the reserved word letter P, which stands for policy, and then we have either role or user or group, and everything that I have just mentioned. And let's take a look at some of these examples. So the read-only role of project team A is allowed to get any application under project team A. In this example, the read-only role is not allowed or denied to get the logs of a specific application named application 1. And the last example would be the platform admin's role is allowed to perform any action on any application under the infra project. Now, there are three options, like I mentioned, either a role or a user or a group, and I recommend you to use roles, and these are the three examples that you see. And why I recommend you to use those roles, we will see it in a couple of slides. So for the role configuration, project can have multiple roles. Those are project scoped roles. And each role can also have multiple policies. Now, roles and policies can be also scoped globally, but we will not dive into it today. So let's take a look at a full manifest of the application project. It's not a full manifest, but it's a full manifest from the point of view of roles. So we see here two roles. One of them has single policy and the other one has multiple policies. This would be a great time to ask any questions that you have.
Yeah, so people, if you're watching us, feel free to ask questions or point any notes on the comments. I can see that we have one comment asking if this session is recorded. So the answer is yes, it is recorded and will stay forever on LinkedIn, on YouTube. But if you have questions about the content of the session, this is the right time to post it. We will also stop by the end of the session. But I have a question, and maybe it's related or unrelated. You can correct me. But I want to ask, like, we have projects and namespaces, and I always confused, like, should we split our project to namespaces? Should we stick to one relation? Or do you have any recommendation around projects and namespaces and how can those relate?
So basically, I would answer the expected answer that it depends, because it usually depends. It depends on the specific needs of the organization and the specific security requirements. And I also mention it in a couple of slides. But it is common scenario that a project can work for multiple namespaces, because you can have multiple namespaces in which the applications can reside or in which the resources can reside. But it is also common that people look at namespaces as at their environments, like dev namespace, prod namespace. And then if those should have different permissions, then it would make sense to have different projects for them. So it would depend on the needs of the organization.
Got it.
But the two are loosely coupled, and it's not required one-to-one or one-to-n relations.
Got it. Got it. Okay, thank you. So I will let you continue because we don't have any question from the audience. But if someone is watching us and got any question, feel free to post it on LinkedIn or YouTube, and we will see it in here.
All right, so let's go on. So we were talking about users and groups with the respect of assigning them to roles. So let's talk a little bit about user and group management, common practices. It is a common practice to use an identity provider, an IDP. It is also recommended to configure ArgoCD with SSO, with single sign-on. And ArgoCD supports multiple IDPs, Azure Enter ID, Okta, Keycloak, and many others. It is recommended that you use SSO users for human interaction, which means for ArgoCD UI or for some one-time CLI commands. You should assign IDP groups to ArgoCD roles. And you should prefer ArgoCD policies for roles over policies for users or groups. And I would recommend to use the local ArgoCD users for automation only, meaning not for the UI and not for one-time CLI commands. In many organizations, it is common that the IDPs, that the identity providers, are managed by a separate team. So we will not be going into how to configure the IDPs and into how to configure the ArgoCD SSO. This is out of scope for our session today, but I want you to remember this and be mindful to that, because this should be implemented. Now let's talk about assigning users to groups, users or groups to roles. So the structure is the who and then the role. And our who can be a user, which is either a local one or an SSO one, or it could be an SSO group. So, for example, the user Jane could be assigned to the read-write role of project team A, and the platform admins group can be assigned to the platform admins role of the platform project. This is how you configure assigning the users or groups to roles. This is configured on the config map, the ArgoCD RBAC config map, and not on the project. And so earlier, I have recommended you to use roles on the policy and not to use users or groups. And now I will explain why I'm saying this. Let's imagine the following scenario. Let's imagine that I have a policy per user. And now I have a new user coming to my team. If this happens, I would have to go to the policy and then duplicate the lines for this new user. But if my policy has a role, then I would just go to the config map and I would add a single line there saying that this user is now assigned to the very same role that is configured on the project. So this way I will not be duplicating configuration. I would even argue that it is better not to use groups on the policy. And so another example of why I'm saying this is imagine that we have team A that is listed here, the team A group that is listed on the policy. And then something happened in the organization and they were structural changes. And now I have team B, which is uniting with my team. And essentially, team B should have the same permissions as team A has. And so if I'm using groups here on the policy, I would have to go and to add a line for the for each policy for this team B that now needs to have the same permissions. But if here I'm configuring a role, then I would go to the config map and add a single line that is saying that team B has now the same role that team A has, and I'm done. And actually, it's a very common practice, not only in ArgoCD, but in other projects and architectures, to separate those two concerns, what the role can do and who is a part of the role. So we were talking about the left side, which was restricting the access to ArgoCD resources. And now let's talk about the right side, which is restricting the Kubernetes resources that applications can deploy. So how would we restrict the access to Kubernetes resources? You can see that we restrict the access to a specific namespace on a specific Kubernetes cluster, and that we also restrict which kinds of Kubernetes resources can the applications deploy. And that also, this configuration also happens on the app project. So how would we restrict the access to Git or Helm repositories? This is how we would do this. We would use the stanza of source repos, and here we would list all the repositories that we trust. And then the applications under this project could only deploy from the repositories that are listed here. Now, Guy, this is actually relating to the question you have asked earlier. So it is a very common scenario that in organizations, people are having a project per team. But this is not necessary, and you should always, always, always model your application projects according to your needs. You should analyze how the teams in your organization are using the ArgoCD applications, and then you should build the structure of the application project in a way that it would answer this type of usage for you. So there is no one-fits-all solution. So it's demo time.
I love demo time.
What?
I said that I love demo time.
Yes. So our demo will demonstrate how those requirements that are listed here are actually implemented. So let's take a look at the requirements. We have the user Jane. She needs to view, sync, and update applications of Team A. But she also needs to view, only view, the applications of Team B. David, on the other hand, needs to view, sync, and update the applications of Team B. And then we have the infrastructure user, which needs full control on applications of both teams and also on the infrastructure applications. Another requirement is that no developer can delete applications or even see infrastructure applications. So let's see this in action.
There you go. And now we can see it.
Great.
If you can just first, make it full screen.
Oh, sorry. Of course, I will. Thank you, Guy. Okay. So now David is logging in, and David can see only one application of team B. And he has permissions to synchronize this application, and so he succeeded doing that. But now he tries to delete the application. And if you remember, he should not be allowed to do so. And so, exactly, he receives a permission error. Now, let's see what's going on with Jane. Jane sees two applications, of Team A and of Team B. She is allowed to sync the applications of Team A, and so this succeeds. But she is not allowed to sync applications of Team B, and so she fails with a permission error. She's also not allowed to delete any application, and so this attempt fails as well. And now let's see the almighty infra user. So infra user sees application of both teams. In addition, this user sees infrastructure applications. Let's see what happens upon an attempt to delete an application, which is an action that infra user should be allowed to do. And as you can see in the screen, there is no error received, and the application was deleted successfully for this infrastructure user. So let's go back to our slides.
There you go.
Yes. You can see at this link, you can actually also scan it, but you can see a GitHub repo which has all the configuration that is required for you to be able to run such a demo and then examine all the components that we have just talked about. So this should be very useful.
I will take the link. I think I got it and I can post it on the chat.
Great. Thank you, Guy. And so at the beginning, we said that it's not a good idea to use the default project in production. And now I can explain why. And the reason is because the default project is over-permissive. Look at how it looks. It allows deploying from any repo, to any namespace, to any cluster, any Kubernetes kind, and also it does not have any built-in roles. And so what this would mean, that then the default roles would be used. What are the default roles? They are over-permissive ones. They're either admin roles or full read roles. And then we also said that it's not a good idea to have everyone log with the local ArgoCD admin. And the alternative to that would be using SSO and then having all the users, each one log in with their distinct SSO user. I would go even further and suggest you to disable the default admin user. This would be far more secured. So to wrap it up, please, please, please don't use the default over-permissive project. Make sure you configure SSO instead of using local users. Model the ArgoCD access that your developer teams need. Please create your own projects then and control the access of developers to applications. And it would be great to set permissions for how the developers interact with applications. Please be minded to which Kubernetes resources applications can deploy and then restrict those when it's appropriate. You should prefer access control policies for roles over access control for users or groups. And last but not least, please consider disabling the default admin user. You can get more info on Kostis Kapeloni's awesome blog. Actually, this whole session is based on this blog. So after watching it and reading the blog, I think you will be fully equipped to start experimenting with ArgoCD RBAC. I also encourage you to read the official ArgoCD documentation about RBAC and also the official documentation about how to configure SSO with ArgoCD. Thank you so much. And this would be a great time for you to post any questions that you might have.
Yeah, and we do have one question from the audience. So
All
we
right.
got Eugene asking, "Hey Reggie, do you have any tips on testing the roles and policies, specifically without making actual users log in and test if they can see and modify something that they shouldn't?"
Actually, yes. There is a feature that is available on the ArgoCD CLI. By using ArgoCD admin, there is an option to validate a resource policy that you have in a file. And this is like kind of previewing. So before applying this policy, you can get the idea of how it would look like. And also, there are different useful commands on the ArgoCD CLI, such as can I. So you can use the CLI to ask, can I do something on these applications, etc., and to get the answer whether it's possible or not. And so all this setup can really help debug whatever is relevant for the access policies. So I hope that answers the question. Feel free to ping me on Slack and I can send the link to this documentation.
Perfect. Thank you. And if anyone got more questions, this is the last time to post it. Um, I have another question around the security of Argo CD and how people can like implement those. Are there any other aspects? Like, of course, there are many, but any other aspects that you think they are kind of the basic day to day that people should pay more attention to secure those?
Um,
I know something that came into my mind last week. I had to connect my repo to like private repo to Argo CD, and then I need to configure all of those,
and you
and it caused me like to think like which user should I pick, which token, how do I make it like synced synchronously from somewhere. um
I think it's a great question. Actually, I think that the principle that would apply here with the user that ArgoCD would be connecting to Git with would be exactly the same principle of least privilege. So I would provide a token that has like the exact read permissions on that same repo. And basically, I would use that. I think that another issue, not an issue, but another aspect to mention with regard to your question is that Argo CD is unopinionated about the way that secrets are stored. But when we're talking about GitOps in the wider aspect, even wider than Argo CD, then obviously secrets and Git, yeah, you cannot keep secrets in Git. So there can be many possible solutions around that, and there are people who are using the external secrets operator, and there are people that are using other external solutions for managing secrets. There is sealed secrets by Bitnami, and there is also the Argo CD Vault custom plugin that can be used. But basically, something to be minded of is that we do not keep secrets in Git and that we address this problem like from the very first steps if when using GitOps.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I see that we don't have any questions. So if people have questions like after rewatching the session, feel free to comment, and sometimes we do overview and answer those questions if we have time. So the last thing, Reggie, I want to thank you so much for coming. I know that scaling Argo CD and thinking what should we design and security is obviously one of the main aspects when we are talking about scaling Argo CD inside the organization, and obviously having more microservices, more teams involved,
Yes.
more compliances added to the company. We need to think about how do we scale that. So Reggie, thank you very much for coming and sharing your amazing insights and practice around securing Argo CD and allow it to run in a multi-tenant way.
Thank you so much, Guy, for hosting me. This was an incredible experience. Thank you so much. And thanks a lot to everyone who watched and to everyone who asked questions. Eugene.
Thank you, everyone, and see you next week on Platform Metrics with Jennifer. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.